Hello and welcome to Crosstalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. Is Donald Trump's national security advisor, John Bolton, a clear and present danger to America and the world? His saber rattling in the Middle East, particularly against Iran, should concern us all. We are forced to ask a fundamental question. Is Bolton the primary architect of Trump's foreign policy? Cross-talking John Bolton. I'm joined by my guest, Brian Becker, in Washington. He's the director of the Answer Coalition, as well as host of Loud and Clear, a daily news show on Radio Sputnik. Also in Washington, we have Gareth Porter. He's an independent investigative journalist and historian, as well as author of Manufactured Crisis, The Untold Story of the Iran Nuclear Scare. And in Boston, we cross to Max Abrams. He's a professor at Northeastern University, as well as author of the new book, Rules for Rebels, The Science of Victory in Militant History. Brilliant title. All right, crosstalk rules in effect. That means you can jump in anytime you want, and I always appreciate it. Brian, I called John Bolton a clear and present threat to the United States in the world. Would you concur, Brian?
Yes, I think President Bolton, National Security Advisor Bolton is indeed a clear and present danger for people around the world and for the United States. I mean, just look at this record. I mean, John Bolton was one of the architects of the Iraq invasion. Bolton and Rumsfeld and Cheney, all of them thought that the Iraqis were going to run out into the streets and put flowers in the end of the gun barrels of American troops. Instead, they went into armed resistance. Even those who certainly opposed Saddam Hussein went into armed resistance because, guess what? People actually don't like foreign powers, no matter how big or strong or powerful, to invade their country, to bomb them and to occupy them. John Bolton is an architect of war everywhere. This man is a lunatic, and I say that advisedly. I mean, right now, what they're doing is pushing for a new confrontation with Iran, a country of 90 million people, a country that has formidable military forces. He's reasserting the Monroe Doctrine from 1815 to carry out regime change, an illegal act against Venezuela. He was the individual who sabotaged Trump's desire for a peace deal on the Korean Peninsula. John Bolton is a militarist. He's the arch-imperialist. I mean, this man belongs in the 19th century with Rudyard Kipling and the others who, brazenly talked about the advantages of colonialism. That's John Bolton.
Gareth, keep going. Okay, Max, jump in. Go ahead, Boston. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, there are very real similarities. I mean, the actual personnel is overlapping in John Bolton between the 2003 Iraq invasion and what's going on with Iran. And there were many, many missteps with Iraq, but the previous guest highlighted an important point, and that is this assumption that when America decides to escalate against a so-called regime, there's this conviction, it's part of American exceptionalism, that the international community will come aboard, that there might be some initial resistance, but when the United States declares its policy of going after the latest dictator, there's this assumption that the rest of the world will come along. And that did not happen with Iraq, and it's certainly not happening with Iran. Quite the opposite. I mean, let's be honest. Iran is not a perfect country. In fact, it's one of the least popular countries in the world. But it took Bolton to, go after Iran, for the international community to, in unprecedented fashion, to rally around the Iranian government. And so Bolton, rather than isolating Iran, is actually helping Iran internationally. So if you look on Twitter, for example, what you see is, hundreds, thousands of people calling out Bolton and saying that this supposed intel, this smoking gun of this qualitative rise in the Iranian threat, that there really doesn't seem to be an empirical basis
but
to
what
it.
it's manufactured consent here. Let me go to Gareth, because that's exactly what it is here. I mean, if you look at the parallels with Iraq in 2003 and Iran in 2019 are remarkable. We have leaks coming out. It looks like Bolton may be giving these leaks out about threats that have come to the American intelligence community's attention, but we can't tell you who. That was certainly an echo of 2003. But, Gareth, I remember, the media said we would never let this happen to us again. We muffed it. We made a mistake. We'll never do it again. They're doing it again with gusto. If you look at the cable stations, they're all very pro-war. Rachel Maddow, even on her own program, praised John Bolton's and talked about his humanity. I mean, this is getting Orwellian. Gareth in Washington.
It is getting Orwellian, no question about it, and it simply underlines the total bankruptcy of this entire state apparatus and the accompanying media apparatus and political elite that have made this possible. But, and I don't disagree with anything that anybody has said thus far, but I think I must point out that the problem that we have specifically with regard to the greatest danger of war today, which is U.S. policy toward Iran, is not just John Bolton. This is a policy that was cooked up between the United States and Israel.
Good point.
Before John Bolton became the National Security Advisor. This began with a joint U.S.-Israel working group that was set up in December of 2017. They have continued to meet, and indeed, as I have pointed out in a story that I published last week, this was the genesis of, in all likelihood, I think there's very strong evidence that this was the genesis of the Bolton pronunciamento on May 5th that said that the Iranians, that they had this intelligence, or they didn't call it intelligence, but this information that Iran intended to carry out attacks against American or allied targets. And this was precisely the point that was being discussed in the U.S.-Israel working group that met in mid-April, as revealed by Barak Ravid, a leading Israeli journalist on national security. So I think we're up against a much larger problem that really the anti-war movement and the media have so far simply not addressed at all.
Okay, let's address something that we haven't. I just want to address something that we haven't talked about yet. Brian, where is Donald Trump in all of this?
Yeah, Donald Trump, I think, may be actually annoyed with John Bolton because Trump, not being the great geostrategic thinker that everyone thought he was, actually believed John Bolton in the case of Venezuela when on January 23rd, Juan Guaido, whom almost no Venezuelans knew his name, announced that he was the president. John Bolton was the one who told Donald Trump, hey, this is going to work. We're going to overthrow Maduro. It's going to be regime change. And it didn't work. And then February 23rd, it was going to work again at the Colombian-Venezuelan border. That didn't work. And then there was the April 30th armed uprising. That didn't work. So Donald Trump is looking like maybe he has egg on his face, and that's something that Donald Trump actually cares about. I want to go back, though, real quick to the Iran issue. Just think there is a geostrategic divide within the U.S. establishment. Barack Obama initiated the negotiations for the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the Iran nuclear arms deal. He invested a lot of political capital in it. It was sort of a minority opinion, but eventually they got the agreement through. Now that Bolton and Trump and Pompeo have sabotaged that agreement, ripped it up, said it was the worst deal ever, there aren't Democrats coming to the fore saying, look, this was Barack Obama's signature foreign policy achievement. We're going to defend it. So you hear Biden and even Bernie Sanders, they're basically mute about this question. So I think it speaks to Garrett's point. There was a geostrategic difference, but Trump represents the majority sentiment. Yeah, well, in the plasma behind you is the Capitol of the United States, and it's a house full of cowards, okay? Max, you wanted to jump in. Go ahead.
Yeah, building off of that, it is true that Trump is deviating from Obama on Iran, particularly with respect to the nuclear question or whatever, the nuclear development. However, in a way, Trump is in a way continuing Obama's policy, particularly on Yemen. Yemen is taking increasing importance because it looks like the tripwire to go after Iran might be the Houthis. And people often forget, because there was hardly any discussion of this in mainstream American media, that the Obama administration was very much interested in helping the Saudis pursue their campaign against Iran by attacking Houthis and other innocent people in Yemen. And so in that sense, there's a continuation. And to build on what Mr. Porter said, it is certainly true that Bolton is in line with Israel and arguably representing Israel. But equally true is that there's very little daylight now in terms of U.S. Mideast policy between the Saudis and the Israelis.
Right.
And so there's been a tremendous amount of U.S. deference in Washington, not only to Jerusalem, but also to Riyadh. And in fact, the policy in Yemen of going after the Houthis, which is taking on increased importance, that's mainly a nod to the Saudis.
Okay, we're going to go to a short break here, and after that short break, we'll continue our discussion on John Bolton and Trump's foreign policy. Stay with our team. Welcome back to Crosstalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. To remind you, we're discussing John Bolton and Trump's foreign policy. All right, let me go back to Gareth in Washington. I have a pet theory, and I've been sticking with it for the last couple of months. And the theory is this, is that Trump has basically outsourced his foreign policy to Bolton and Pompeo with the caveat, don't start a new war. Basically, you can do whatever you want, okay? And it seems to be playing out that way. And I want to echo what Brian was saying, is that when he was told that this was, my word, a cakewalk in Venezuela, and it didn't turn out to be a cakewalk, then I think that's, that he showed some public frustration, mildly criticizing what was a backhanded compliment in a way. So, Gareth, do you think my theory has any holds water? Go ahead, Gareth.
Well, yeah, I think that's absolutely true. But I'd like to just go back to the point that Max was making before the break about the Houthis and a trigger point or a triggering mechanism for Bolton and the war conspiracy that we now see underway. I think the point that really needs to be underlined here, that the media has totally missed in its coverage of this whole Iran kerfuffle, is that what Bolton did in that statement in early May was to add a whole new category of contingencies in which or for which the Trump administration, he's saying, would retaliate directly against Iran were there to be a, quote, proxy force attack, not just against U.S. targets, but against Israeli or Saudi targets. And that's why the Houthis could be a triggering mechanism.
But Gareth, that tells me that the Trump administration, or at least John Bolton and Mike Pompeo, are trying to talk the United States into a war. That's what it sounds like. Gareth.
Well, absolutely. I mean, they are citing an example is the oil tankers that were supposedly sabotaged. I think they were sabotaged. And then we have Dan Coates coming in with this inane statement saying, well, this is the MO of Iran. We have every reason to think that they did it. That is absolutely ridiculous. I mean, this was, of course, not in the interests of Iran. It's exactly the opposite. And whose interest is it in? Well, it's the Saudis and particularly the Israelis. The Israelis, of course, have the capability of naval covert operations SEAL teams that they have used in the past for operations. They could easily affix a limpet mine on a ship so that it wouldn't sink, but that it would show a big gash in it, and it could be blamed on the Iranians.
Or maybe it was
I have
just
every reason to believe.
Or it was just a collision. Okay, I mean, it could be that. I mean, because they're not giving us information to make draw conclusions. Brian, the same question. That it seems to me that this is Trump's gambit here, because he. However you feel about Donald Trump, I still believe that he has that metaphorical envelope in his pocket, and he's checking off all of his promises. He's really fanatical about that, and he said that he would not start a new war. And I think he wants to keep his word on that there. But when you give like an arsonist like Bolton in charge, this is where the tension is, because Bolton, I don't think he has any idea what Trump means by America first at all, okay? Bolton has a mission, and it's not to pursue a Trump administration foreign policy, because we really don't know what that is 2 years in. Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, here, John, here's some matches. Be sure you don't light that next building on fire.
Right.
I agree with you. And the point that you're making is an important one. George W. Bush basically subcontracted his Mideast foreign policy out to Dick Cheney. I mean, Cheney would stop by the Oval Office, and he was about to give a speech basically sort of laying out why the U.S. was going to go to war against Iraq. And Bush would look up, according to the reports, and say, oh, you're going to be really tough, right? And Cheney would say, yeah, I'm going to be really tough. In other words, George W. Bush had a hands-off approach, just basically subcontracting his foreign policy out to these neocons. Donald Trump has done the same thing. Perhaps there's a lot of issues that are underway right now. Trump seems to be focused on the struggle against China. Again, he's getting a lot of support from the Democratic Party. Adam Schiff today came out saying it was very welcome what Donald Trump was doing about Huawei. So he could win over the Democrats by being hardline on a number of these issues. Say to Bolton and Pompeo, yeah, go for it, just don't start a war. But again, that's a very dangerous assumption, because John Bolton and Mike Pompeo and the Israelis would be very happy to start a war.
Absolutely. Max, the question goes to you.
Can I just jump in on this?
Okay, real quick, Gareth, go ahead. Go ahead, Gareth.
Yeah, this is precisely what the problem is with Bolton, the relationship between Bolton and Trump. One of the huge rumors in Washington now is that Trump really is very angry with Bolton. And wants to get rid of him. But we've got two problems. One, the big problem is that Trump's personality is that he acts the tough guy, but he's really soft, and he has a tough time dealing with people who are tough guys who know how to appeal to him. And he has that problem clearly with Bolton. And the second thing is that the longer he delays, the easier it is for Bolton to start a process of escalation, which makes it more difficult for him to turn it around. So that's the real danger, I think, that we face.
Max, I thought Gareth makes such an excellent point, because a lot of the smart people, and I think Moon of Alabama is a great place to read about some of these things, a very smart analysis there, that the point of de-escalation might have already passed, and that's what we have to really worry about. Because I don't think Trump wants a war with Iran. I mean, the Iranians certainly don't, but now we're in the area where an accident can happen, or somebody will exaggerate an event to say this is a red line here. And this is just, it's like August 1914 all over again. Max, go ahead.
The president is not in control. So I do not think that he could rein in what's going on. He doesn't control what Bolton and Pompeo are saying. And, it's not just rhetoric alone. This rhetoric could bind the United States and put pressure on Washington, D.C. to respond. The range of potential provocations has been expanded almost indefinitely. So it could be an errant Hezbollah attack on northern Israel. It could be some more, Houthi drones into Saudi Arabia. It could be some kind of a mysterious sabotage attack where, we don't really know who the culprits are. It could be a Shia militia group in Iraq. But the rhetoric is growing, and there will be growing expectations, perhaps by the American public, to really respond forcefully. And so that's why I think that the alternative, independent media really needs to take each of these allegations really seriously, and to track down whether or not it's true that Iran was responsible. And to ask the question, even if Iran were to be responsible for some of these provocations,
is it worth the war?
Does it actually pose a direct threat to U.S. national security? And in general, the answer, of course, is no.
Brian, you've been on this program many, many times, and we've been largely in agreement on things. And I know we're in agreement is that why do they think it's going to work this time if we go down this path of conflict? Because the people that are running this have an amazing record, a almost complete 100% failure record when it approaches regime changes like this here. They have nothing to run on except for failure. But this time is going to be different. Really? How can they think that way? Go ahead, Brian.
The policymakers in Washington, like Bolton, like Pompeo, and including the Democratic Party, who are sort of the tail to their kite now, they're working under this agreement that America may be an empire in decline, but by applying maximum pressure on all of its so-called enemies or adversaries, it will get them to crumble. And so we see, I think Bolton is working out of the playbook of Ronald Reagan in the 1980s when they ratcheted up the arms race against the Soviet Union, thinking that, well, look, we might go bankrupt from this, but they'll go bankrupt first. And I think that when you look at what's going on in China, in Venezuela, now against Iran, we have a maximum pressure strategy. And I think what they have behind them is this concept. We are the greatest military power in the world. We may no longer be the greatest economic power, but this power we can assert and exert, and that's our only ticket.
Yeah, but Brian,
and so that's why
Brian,
the neocon position.
When has it worked? When has it worked? Okay, so you have the greatest military on the planet.
It doesn't work.
It doesn't work. Okay, they don't get the results they want. Keep going, Brian. Keep going.
It worked in Grenada.
Yeah, but the
it worked in
problem
Grenada.
Grenada.
250,000.
All right, Panama. Okay, so, it worked there. All right. Wow, big deal.
That's my point.
They must be so proud.
I'm agreeing with.
I know you're agreeing with me.
I'm agreeing with you. I raised Grenada as an irony. Yes, it doesn't work, but there's no consequences. These people act with impunity over and over again. Why aren't any of them in jail? They're not even fired. They're actually going around making speeches and making lots of money in spite of the fact that they had Iraq, Libya, so many other failed policies that killed literally hundreds of thousands or perhaps millions of people. Absolute impunity. That's why it keeps happening.
Gareth, jump in. Gareth, go ahead.
The reason for the impunity is that there is such vested interests in this society, in the political system, in the bureaucracy, in the media, in the political elite, that it's impossible for people to face the truth. It's a matter of denial on the basis of the huge interests that they have of various sorts. That's what we're up against.
Okay, I'm going to give the last word to Max. Go ahead, Max in Boston. Go ahead, Max in Boston.
There are no historical examples of U.S.-led regime change in the Muslim world working out well. There are arguably cases outside of the Muslim world, but not in the Muslim world. Regime change in the 50s against Iran turned out to have a huge blowback. Iraq was a failure. Libya was a failure. I would also include Syria. That wasn't a complete regime change, but it was a regime change effort in terms of arming the rebels. And so when you see situations like this, where there's no empirical basis to think that a policy will be successful, it points to ideology as being the driving factor.
It points to ideological possession. On that note, gentlemen, we've run out of time. Many thanks to my guests in Washington and in Boston. And thanks to our viewers for watching us here at RT. See you next time. And remember, crosstalk rules.